In this video, we're going to show you how to get your new FortiMail up and running for the first time. This will include the following steps: logging in for the first time, configuring the FortiMail, device registration and FortiGuard services, creating firewall services and addresses, port forwarding with virtual IPs, defining firewall policies, and testing the installation. Let's get started. There are many configurations to an enterprise network, and a few different ways to integrate a FortiMail into those networks. For this scenario though, we're going to begin with a previously installed and working Exchange server that is located in a DMZ network behind a FortiGate. We will use the following pre-configured DNS settings and addresses as the basis of our implementation. By making some minor changes to your network, we can protect the Exchange server and our users from spam, viruses, and other malicious attacks. To do this, we will incorporate a FortiMail into the scenario for inbound and outbound scanning of email messages. Since every network is unique in its implementation of SMTP servers, authentication methods, and mail routing, this video will not be able to cover every possible configuration. However, the concepts in this video should allow variations to work with similar methods. The first thing we will need to do is set up the FortiMail hardware to allow us to configure the system. There are two methods of gaining access to the settings of your FortiMail unit. The first is through the console port via the command line interface, which is covered in the FortiMail Quick Start Guide and not shown in this tutorial. The second is through the web UI via your browser. To gain access through your browser, we will need to make a couple of changes to the management computer. By default, the IP address on port 1 of the FortiMail unit is set to 192.168.1.99. To access that network address, plug in your managing computer into port 1 and manually change your IP address to 192.168.1.2 with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. Once those changes have been set, open up your browser and type in the URL address https://192.168.1.99/admin. The default username is admin and there is no password. Now that we have access to the FortiMail GUI, we need to select an operation mode for our desired configuration. Under the System Information area, select Gateway from the Operation Mode pulldown, if it isn't already selected. If you are changing the operation mode, the system will reboot and any pre-configured settings will reset. Once you log back into the system, click on the wizard icon. Click Yes to acknowledge that the current configuration will be reset. The Quick Start Wizard is comprised of 7 stages that will get your FortiMail up and running with minimal effort. The first step is to change the default admin password to something secure with at least 8 characters. Then click Next. Under the Network Settings section, we see the default settings of port 1, in which we are physically connected. We will change the following addresses to entries that are appropriate for our network for port 1, primary and secondary DNS, and the default gateway. When finished, click Next. For step 3, let's enter in a host name and a local domain name. For this example, I will use mrelay as the host name and example.com as the domain. Select SMTP over SSL/TLS and click Next. Next, we need to set up the domain configuration to make sure that the mail routing goes to the right place. Click New. Enter in the domain name and Exchange server address for your network. For this scenario, mail.example.com will be our SMTP server that the FortiMail will associate with. Click Create and then Next. While you should take some time later to customize your anti-spam and antivirus scanning settings for the FortiMail, for now though, leave the default choices for step 5 and click Next. We will leave the outgoing scanning settings the same as well. Under the Access Control for SMTP Relay settings, click New. Enter in the IP address and netmask of your SMTP server. This prevents other rogue SMTP servers from sending emails through your FortiMail. Under Sender Pattern, type in *@ your domain name. This allows only users on your domain to send emails. Change authentication status to any and action to relay. Click Create when finished. Click Next. Look over all the settings you configured within the wizard and click OK if everything looks appropriate. The FortiMail will now end your session and restart with the new network settings in place. At this time, you should disconnect the management computer from port 1, connect the FortiMail to the DMZ network via port 1, and connect the management computer to the DMZ network. Once you are back on the network, log in using the new address for port 1. Now that our FortiMail is configured for the network, we need to register it with the FortiGuard protection services. While logging into FortiMail and in the System Information area of the dashboard, highlight and copy your serial number. Navigate your browser to support.fortinet.com. Log into the website and click Register/Renew. Paste in your FortiMail serial number to register the device. Once everything is complete, go back to the FortiMail GUI. Navigating to the Maintenance menu and FortiGuard submenu, you will see the current status of your FortiGuard subscription services. Feel free to change the scheduled update frequency to whatever you prefer. If your FortiMail is already able to reach the internet, feel free to click Update Now to force an update. If not, don't worry. The device will receive automatic updates from FortiGuard protection services once we are done configuring the FortiGate in the next sections. Before we can fully test the FortiMail installation, we must set up the firewall to allow email messages to be relayed through the system. Since we already have a functioning Exchange server on our network, we need to modify the current firewall policy settings on our FortiGate to direct the correct services to the appropriate locations. Let's begin by setting up an address for the FortiMail. On your FortiGate, navigate to Policy and Objects and Addresses. Click Create New and Address. Since this address is going to be for the FortiMail within the DMZ, give it an appropriate name and the IP address we used earlier. Then select DMZ as the interface and click OK. Now we need to define a few services that our FortiGate will allow in and out of the DMZ network. Let's start by creating a couple of custom services that apply towards our FortiMail's FortiGuard services. Click on the Service submenu and create New Service. The first service will be the FortiGuard anti-spam rating lookup. Enter in an appropriate name, select UDP as the destination port, and enter 8889 as the low and high port numbers. Click OK. Create another service. This one is for the FortiGuard antivirus push updates. Enter in an appropriate name, select UDP as the destination port, and enter 9443 as the low and high port numbers. Click OK. The last service we need to define here is for SMTP submission over port 587 from the mail clients to the mail server. If you don't already have an entry for that in the list, click Create New Service. Enter in an appropriate name, select TCP as the destination port, and enter 587 as the low and high port numbers. Click OK. Next, we need to create and modify virtual IPs so that the FortiMail is accessible to external network traffic across the FortiGate. Navigate to the Virtual IPs menu. With the previously installed Exchange server, you should already have some virtual IPs associated with it that may need to be modified or deleted first. For this scenario, we are going to use various port forwarding options so that we only need one virtual IP that gets routed to either the FortiMail or the Exchange server based on the service type. This configuration allows you to keep your DNS entries and mail client configurations the same for easy integration into your network environment. All total, we will need 6 virtual IP entries, 3 for the FortiMail and 3 for the Exchange server. Let's begin by creating the FortiMail entries. Click New and Virtual IP. The first one will be for SMTP traffic. Enter in an appropriate name, select WAN 1 as the interface, set the external IP address as your previously determined public IP, and the mapped IP address as the internal address of the FortiMail. Toggle the port forwarding switch. Using the TCP protocol, enter in 25 for the external service port and mapped port. Once finished, click OK. Create 2 more for the FortiMail address using TCP on port 443 for HTTPS traffic and UDP on port 9443 for the antivirus service we previously created. Now we need to create the Exchange entries. Click New and Virtual IP. The first one will be for IMAP traffic. Enter in an appropriate name, select WAN 1 as the interface, set the external IP address as your previously determined public IP, and the mapped IP address as the internal address for the Exchange server. Toggle the port forwarding switch. Using the TCP protocol, enter in 143 for the external service port and map 2 port. Once finished, click OK. Create 2 more for the Exchange server address using TCP on port 110 for POP3 traffic and TCP on port 587 for the SMTP submission service we previously created. The last step on our FortiGate is creating and modifying the policies that will shape the traffic across our network. Click on IPv4 policy. In this scenario, we will need 3 policies, 2 that will limit traffic to and from the FortiMail, and 1 that will affect inbound traffic to the Exchange server. While you should already have a couple of policies in effect for your current email server, for illustrative purposes I will create all 3 in this video. Click Create New. For the first of these policies, we will allow external network traffic to access the FortiMail. Enter in an appropriate name. Select the incoming interface as WAN 1. Select the outgoing interface as DMZ. Our source is going to be all. Our destination address is going to be the 3 virtual IPs of the FortiMail we created. And our allowable services need to be SMTP, HTTPS, and the FortiMail antivirus service we created. Once finished, click OK. Click Create New. The second policy will allow our DMZ'd FortiMail to send traffic outside of our network. Enter in an appropriate name, select the incoming interface as DMZ, select the outgoing interface as WAN1. Our source is going to be the FortiMail address, our destination address is going to be all, and our allowable services need to be SMTP, HTTPS, NTP, DNS, and the FortiMail anti-spam service we created. Once finished, click OK. Click Create New. The third policy will allow our external network users to access the Exchange server. Enter in an appropriate name, select the incoming interface as WAN1, select the outgoing interface as DMZ. Our source is going to be all, our destination address is going to be the 3 virtual IPs of the Exchange server we created, and our allowable services need to be IMAP, POP3, and the SMTP submission service. Once finished, click OK. With the example scenario we have set up, testing the installation is easy. Since we use the port forwarding virtual IPs, we do not need to modify the MX records on our DNS servers. Existing email configurations should work without any changes as well. The only possible adjustment might be the outgoing SMTP server port number from 25 to 587, depending upon your initial deployment. In our finished scenario, any public SMTP messages sent to our external IP address is relayed through the FortiMail, and then, upon a successful scan, is relayed to the Exchange server. For outbound messages sent by our internal domain users, the messages are delivered to the Exchange server and relayed to the FortiMail. Upon a successful scan, it is then relayed out to the DMZ network and across the internet to its intended recipient. In order to make sure that the Exchange server correctly sends SMTP messages through the FortiMail, you will need to configure the FortiMail as a smart host on your Exchange server before sending messages. Once you have confirmed that messages are sent and received through your FortiMail, you can view real-time statistics of SMTP traffic in the System Status section of the Monitor menu. Here you can see data on successfully delivered messages and rejected messages from the antivirus scanning. That concludes our basic setup video for FortiMail. For more technical videos, visit video.fortinet.com. Thank you for watching.